If you were driving through Miller's Creek that cold March morning, you might have missed the man sitting on the curb outside the clinic, unless you looked close enough to see the quiet kind of heartbreak in his eyes. His name was Calvin Price, a 43-year-old carpenter who'd once built half the porches in town. Now, he was fighting a battle he couldn't fix with wood and nails. Calvin had been diagnosed with stage 3 lymphoma 6 months ago. Since then, his life had unraveled one bill, one appointment, one rejection at a time. But he wasn't here for sympathy. He was here because he'd been promised one last round of treatment, the one that might give him a real chance to see his 12-year-old daughter, Ellie, grow up. They'd driven an hour that morning in their old pickup, Ellie in the passenger seat, clutching her father's lunchbox and humming quietly, as if holding her voice steady might hold him together too. When they reached Stanton Regional Cancer Center, Calvin could barely keep his balance walking to the front desk. He smiled politely at the woman behind the glass window. "Morning. Calvin Price. I've got an appointment with Dr. Easton." The woman typed something into her computer, her nails clacking like a ticking clock. "Insurance?" she asked without looking up. Calvin rubbed the back of his neck. "Expired last week. I'm waiting on my renewal letter, but I can pay a portion today." That was when she looked up, cold, rehearsed sympathy. "I'm sorry, Mr. Price, but without active coverage, we can't proceed with chemotherapy." Calvin blinked, confused. "Ma'am, I was told." She cut him off. "The policy changed this month. You'll have to reapply once your insurance is reactivated." He gripped the counter, the blood rushing to his ears. "I don't have time for paperwork. Please, I've come too far to stop now." Her tone never changed. "There's nothing we can do." Behind him, Ellie's small voice trembled. "Daddy? What's wrong?" Calvin couldn't answer. He just turned, took her hand, and walked out of the clinic before anyone could see him cry. They sat on the tailgate of his truck in silence, rain beginning to fall. Ellie leaned her head on his shoulder. "You told me this was the one that was gonna make you better." Calvin swallowed hard. "It was supposed to be, baby." That's when the rumble came, deep and distant at first, then closer, louder, until it filled the whole parking lot. A convoy of motorcycles pulled in from the main road, their chrome wet with rain, their jackets marked with an emblem that read Steel Mercy Riders. 8 of them, all rough around the edges, but not reckless. There was something disciplined about the way they parked in a line, engines idling low. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with sandy hair streaked with gray, took off his helmet and noticed Calvin and Ellie sitting in the rain. He crossed the lot with a steady stride, boots splashing through puddles. "You two need a hand?" he asked, his voice gravelly but kind. Calvin tried to smile. "No, sir. Just a long day." The man studied him for a moment. "Name's Reed Holloway," he said, holding out a gloved hand. "You don't look like someone who quits easy." Calvin hesitated before shaking his hand. "Calvin Price. And I don't quit. Just, running out of places to stand." Reed's brow furrowed. "Clinic give you trouble?" Calvin let out a tired laugh. "They said no treatment without insurance. Guess cancer waits for paperwork now." Reed's jaw tightened. "That's not right." He looked at Ellie, whose big brown eyes met his with quiet worry. "And this your little girl?" Ellie nodded. "They told my dad to come back later, but he's sick now." Something shifted in Reed's expression, like a storm cloud turning solid. He looked back toward his crew, who were watching from their bikes. "Stay here," he told Calvin. "We'll handle it." Before Calvin could ask what he meant, Reed and his riders marched toward the clinic doors. Through the rain-streaked glass, Calvin saw the front desk clerk glance up, startled. Reed leaned on the counter, talking low but firm. Within minutes, the administrator appeared, and then Dr. Easton. The air inside looked tense, gestures, raised voices, papers flying. One of the bikers, a woman with a braid down her back, pointed toward the window, straight at Calvin and Ellie sitting in the truck. Then, as suddenly as they'd gone in, the Steel Mercy riders walked out again. Reed was carrying a clipboard. He handed it to Calvin with a small grin. "Your treatment's back on schedule, starting tomorrow morning. No charge. Looks like Stanton Regional just remembered they have a community relief fund collecting dust." Calvin stared, stunned. You did this?" Reed shrugged. "We made a few calls. Reminded them that kindness isn't charity, it's humanity. Sometimes people forget that." Ellie broke into a smile for the first time all day. "You're like heroes." Reed chuckled. "Nah, sweetheart. Just neighbors who still believe this country's heart beats strongest when we look out for each other. That's what we call Heartland kindness." Calvin felt tears he hadn't let fall in years. "I don't even know how to thank you." "Just get better," Reed said softly. "And when you can, pass it on." As the bikers started their engines again, thunder rolling behind them, Calvin held his daughter close. For the first time in months, the road ahead didn't look so hopeless. But he didn't yet know that this act of kindness would spark something far greater, something that would make Miller's Creek remember what community truly meant. By the next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving Miller's Creek bathed in pale sunlight. Calvin drove to Stanton Regional with Ellie sitting beside him, clutching a paper bag with sandwiches she'd made for the road. The hospital looked the same, cold brick, clean windows, but something felt different. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was the sound of his daughter humming again. At the front desk, the same woman who turned him away looked up. This time, her tone was polite, almost apologetic. "Mr. Price, we have your file ready. Dr. Easton will see you shortly." Calvin nodded, saying nothing, but the shift wasn't lost on him. Money hadn't made it happen. Kindness had, and not the kind that came from pity, but the kind that carried power behind it. As he walked back for his treatment, Reed's words echoed in his mind, "Pass it on." The chemo hit harder than he remembered. Hours later, when he stumbled out, pale and exhausted, Ellie was waiting in the lobby with 2 paper cups of cocoa. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You did it, Daddy," she whispered. "You're really fighting again." He smiled, though his eyes were glassy. "Yeah, baby girl. Guess we're not done yet." They didn't know it, but while Calvin was in that clinic room, something had started spreading around town. The next morning, a photo appeared on Miller's Creek's local Facebook page, Calvin sitting on his truck, soaked from the rain, with the Steel Mercy rider standing behind him. The caption read, "When a man was denied cancer care, strangers on bikes reminded this town what Heartland kindness means." By noon, it had been shared hundreds of times. Within 2 days, thousands. People who'd driven past that same clinic without noticing the man outside suddenly saw themselves in his place. Farmers, teachers, single moms, they all started asking questions. Why had so many people been denied help? Why had compassion become conditional? At the local diner, talk buzzed over coffee cups. "You hear about the riders?" a waitress asked, wiping down a counter. Clinics scrambling to save face. Guess they didn't expect a bunch of bikers to bring the town together. The movement caught fire faster than anyone expected. Reed and the Steel Mercy riders weren't used to attention, but they didn't back down. They started organizing charity rides across nearby counties, fundraisers for families who'd fallen through the cracks, for patients like Calvin who'd been turned away. They called it the Heartland Kindness Run, and within weeks, the roads of Miller's Creek were filled with roaring engines and waving flags. Calvin joined one of those rides 3 weeks later. His hair had started thinning, but his eyes were bright again. Ellie rode in the truck bed, holding a cardboard sign that said, "Thank you for saving my dad." When Reed saw it, he couldn't stop smiling. "Told you, brother," he said, clapping Calvin on the back. "You weren't meant to fight alone." Calvin looked at the long line of riders behind them, farmhands, mechanics, veterans, mothers, even a local sheriff. Never thought strangers could care this much. Reed nodded. That's the thing about kindness, it's contagious if you let it breathe. The ride ended in front of Stanton Regional. Reporters stood with cameras, and the clinic's director, Dr. Easton, came out nervously to speak. He'd seen the town's anger online, the outrage, the petitions, the donations pouring in for Calvin's medical bills. Standing before the crowd, Dr. Easton took a breath. Our community deserves better than bureaucracy, he said. Starting today, Stanton Regional is launching a permanent relief program for patients without coverage. It'll be funded entirely by local partnerships and... Reed's voice cut in, good-natured but firm. And the Heartland Kindness Run. The crowd cheered. Calvin stood beside him, humbled, barely able to speak. Later that evening, back at his small house, Calvin sat on the porch with Ellie as the sun dipped behind the fields. The chemo had left him tired, but not broken. He looked at his daughter, her face lit by the last light of day, and felt something he hadn't in months, peace. Daddy, Ellie said softly, do you think people will remember? He smiled faintly. I think they already do. This isn't just about me, sweetheart. It's about everyone who thought nobody cared. She leaned against him. I want to help too someday. You will, he said. Kindness doesn't stop with us. Down the road, the distant sound of engines echoed again. Reed and the riders were headed out for another town, another story, another chance to remind people that compassion still existed in the Heartland. Calvin watched until the sound faded, his heart full. Maybe he wasn't cured yet. Maybe the fight wasn't over. But something had changed. Because sometimes the smallest act, a stranger's hand, a few brave voices, can heal more than medicine ever could. And somewhere out there, under the wide Kansas sky, a convoy of bikes carried that truth down another lonely road, spreading the same message that saved a dying man. Kindness still rides.